Hello and welcome to episode 254 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I am one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I, of course, am the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And today we are graced by a very special guest. This is a true Renaissance man, and I actually don't use that term lightly. It's actually difficult for me to comprehend everything that's going on with this guy. He's playing DFS at the highest stakes. He's playing poker at the highest stakes. He was teaching at Harvard. He's an excellent tennis player, as I found out. He is running miles in 5 minutes and 30 seconds, as I found out. He's writing books. I don't know how he's doing it all. It is, of course, the legend himself, Brandon Adams, a.k.a. B.A., a.k.a. Brandon Adams, all one word on DK. Brandon, what's going on, man?
What's up? That's a nice intro. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess my first question for you has to be, how can you possibly do all this? It is a massive effort just for me to try to be good at NFL DFS, let alone all the DFS sports, let alone poker and athletics and economics and whatever else you're working on. How is it possible you can do all these things at the same time?
Well, first of all, is it a lot? Because it's not like I'm working 50 hours a week and doing this. Like, this is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first question. Is it a lot? But then all of the stuff is related, and the background that I've had lent itself very well to studying poker. I was a PhD student in economics. I studied game theory. I taught game theory. That led itself to poker. Thinking about poker leads itself to daily fantasy sports, and it's all related in my mind.
Are you working with a team? Is there a team behind Brandon Adams, or when you're playing DFS or playing poker, is it all you?
Advanced Sports Analytics has one employee who also has a full-time job. I tell him which data I would like to have on the site, and he designs the data. He has zero input in lineups. So the lineups are 100% me. And my method is very old school manual. Like, I pretty much never have an algorithmic approach to lineups. It's all by hand.
How are you keeping up with the news and everything that's going on in sports? Because to me, that's the biggest time-consuming thing. All the injuries, everything that's going on. How are you staying on top of that with the schedule that you're doing?
Well, I guess so. We'll dig into DFS first, which is
okay.
It's a half-hour conversation, I guess. But my process in DFS is, if I'm in it, I'm mostly in it playing every slate. So you've probably noticed that there are months where I'm playing every slate and high volumes. I don't dip in and out. Like, I tend to either be like all in or just taking a break. When you're all in, your process becomes much more efficient because, as you know, if you take 2 weeks off and then you want to dip in and play an NBA slate,
mm-hmm.
It's going to take you 6-7 hours to prepare. If you're playing NBA every night, you might be able to prep the same slate in 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you have all of the relevant background. You know, all right, which teams are on a back-to-back, which teams are in the playoff hunt, which teams have been resting guys, what the rotations look like, what the injury situation is looking like, et cetera, et cetera. So I find, like, for instance, in basketball this year, certainly in January and early February, I was like all in. So the process starts to get pretty efficient because you're playing every slate and you're just up to date on things. Also, you know where to look. There are resources that you begin to trust. And for news, like, obviously Fantasy Labs is a great source. Like, the @Fantasy Labs NBA is a great Twitter source. for someone who's just beginning NBA, I would just recommend they go to Roto Grinders DFS NBA Twitter list and just use that collection of beat reporters and so forth, and then just add on at the margin. Like if Daily Roto updates show that they're trusting some beat reporter and it's not on your list, add that beat reporter to your list and develop your own curated Twitter list, and then that becomes your source of information. Now, Daily Roto is a pretty incredible source of information, and they are a big time saver in that their updates that come via email to subscribers are a very, very good way to just stay updated and make sure you're not missing anything. So in practice, I've got the Twitter screen up with beat reporters. I've got email up where I'm looking at the Daily Roto updates to make sure I'm not missing anything. If there is a particular situation of interest, I'll try to dig around that and just make some educated guesses about what I think the probability of some guy playing is. And that's pretty much my process for injuries. The part that I think I'm good at is I feel like the industry is very consensus oriented on what is a good play. And I'm very good at kind of doing the idiosyncratic play that I think is smart. And now it might not work out to be a good play, but I'll have some data behind it and I'll just go with it. And it's worked very well for tournaments, especially this year, because I would dare say that the FanDuel system of dropping a score has helped me more than any other player, because my approach is a little puntish and a little bit speculative. So it's helped me, I think, more than other players. But the site that I keep, advancedsportsanalytics.com, our data is it's really focused on two main areas, and these areas are of specific value to tournament players. One area is, whereas other sites are focused on value, like which players have the highest projected fantasy points per dollar, and on mean expectation, our sites are focused on distributions and correlations. Our site's focused on distributions and correlations. So this information is inherently more important for the tournament player because, as you know, to win a tournament, it's like hitting a parlay where you have to hit in every spot, or every spot but one. Hitting a parlay of independent events is too difficult. So you have to build in correlation wherever you can. One smart way to build in correlation is game stacks, right? 6% of NBA, 6.2% of games go into overtime. You want to be in a situation where, okay, I've got 6 game stacks of this high total game, 6 of this high total game. In the 6% chance that this game goes into overtime, I'm getting 30 extra player minutes that other players aren't getting. I'm likely to win. On correlation, you want to have multiple spots of correlation in each lineup. So game stack is one. Another way to do it is you just make an assumption about what might happen in a key game. Like, say Golden State is playing the Clippers. You just make an assumption that Golden State is gonna blow out the Clippers more than the market expects. Okay. And then you could look at the advanced sports analytics data and see in a blowout which players on Golden State perform well. So you could say, oh, well, Iguodala does really well in blowouts, or Quinn Cook does really well in blowouts. And since you're taking the position that it's a blowout, you play the guys that do well in a blowout, and that's automatically giving you correlation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you would so you're starting with the game script and saying, okay, if this game script happens, I want to position myself to win.
Yeah.
So like tonight, I'm going to play the big slate of games. I'm going to start off by saying, okay, if this high total close game goes into overtime, I want a couple of lineups that are likely to win in that case.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's say there's one game with an especially high total. I'll say, okay, let's assume that this game is a blowout. I want a lineup where I'm going to have two punts that do really well in a blowout, so I'm in a good position to win if the blowout happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I encourage people to think about GPPs from an if-then perspective as well, and I think that's basically what you're saying. And I think another thing that you guys talk about on your site, is thinking more probabilistically about outcomes than, straight median projection. I think so many people are thinking in black and white, and I've been, victim of this too, or at fault for doing this too. And, it makes me think of NFL, and I think I really turned the corner this year by saying, hey, just because a guy's value is really good, like, I don't know, Quincy Enunwa or Cole Beasley or whatever, low ADOT, low yak kind of wide receiver you want to play, I'd much rather go with a guy who has the higher ADOT, and probabilistically his chances of having a really big score are way higher, even if his median projection is lower. Does that make sense to you? And
oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest mistake that people make in NFL is playing lineups that can't win because there's no upside built into the lineup. They're having guys that have high fantasy point per dollar, so they have high value, but they have 0% probability of the really high ceilings that you need to win a tournament. So that's the biggest single mistake that people make in GPPs. Another issue, you brought up the median versus mean situation. Another thing that's neglected in NFL is every player knows to focus on high total games. That's obvious. But in my opinion, in tournaments, people should have even more of a focus on high total games than they do. And the reason is that, let's say you have a game total of 40 versus a game total of 49. That betting number is obviously a median expectation. So the difference in the expected means is more than 9. But there's another phenomena at play where you could instead cut up the data and say, all right, let's look at every game that's been played that has a total of 40, and let's look at every game that's been played that has a total of 49. And then let's look at the probability of that game having 65 total points scored. The probability of the 49-point game having 65 points scored might be 4.5 times the probability of the 40-point game having 65 points scored. And the probability of 75 points scored might be close to 0 for the 40-point game, and reasonable for the 49-point game.
Okay, we've talked a lot of strategy. I got to ask you about game selection, because you're famous, I think, for coming in about an hour before lock and capping high stakes 3-mans and getting in all the games. And do you, playing against Wiggins and Empire or Peter and Chipotle or whoever else, do you practice any game selection at all in DFS, or you just take all comers? Do you think about it at all? What type of games you're playing?
So, I would say that the only area where I have game selection that could be viewed as poor is 3-ways, because I think I'm just better at 3-ways. So, I mean, those guys would tell you that I was the biggest winner in 3-ways last year. Like, I'm just better at 3-ways. I just know how to think about where to deviate and get 2-to-1 in certain spots, and what the what other lineups are likely to be, and which guys tend to play heads up type lineups in three ways and stuff like that. So three ways, I'll basically take on all comers. Heads up, I think those guys are better than me, so it's rare that I do it. Like, yeah, I know that sometimes they're like, what the I'm sorry, he's taking all the three ways, and like we're just sitting here waiting for these certain players or whatever. But that's just sort of what I did last year, was sort of try to own the lobby in three ways. Heads up, I don't think I'm better at heads up. I just have this specific skill that I developed last year on the three ways. So yeah, I don't have that same behavior in the heads up, and I don't think I ever will, because I don't know. I think heads up is sort of dying, but even if it were rake free, I just wouldn't take on the action.
I'm curious your thoughts on the state of the DFS ecosystem, and we're going to get into poker a little bit here in a minute, but people have compared the DFS ecosystem to poker. I think people may have suggested that the DFS ecosystem has gotten worse at a more rapid rate than poker did. I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Well, the poker ecosystem got efficient at a very rapid rate, so I could hardly say that it got efficient more rapidly than poker. People conveniently forget how competitive poker was at every state. There were brief exceptions, like live poker from 2005 to 2007, say, online poker in some specific parts in time in some specific games, but for the most part, poker has been ferociously competitive from the beginning, and it was remarkable how things splintered into a level of specialization very quickly. So, for instance, if you think about 2007, say, you had guys like Patrick, like Tom, literally playing every game type and any number of players from 2 to 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their level of specialization was 0, and their results were often good. Sometimes they would venture in a new game and get killed, but then they would still keep playing that game. But Patrick played all games. He played all sizes of games, and he's one of the biggest winners in the history of online poker. Phil Ivey basically played all games and all sizes, and he was one of the biggest winners. Durr, same story.
Mm-hmm.
Durr would play 4 tables of heads up and then also have 3 tables of six max pot limit Omaha going. Like crazy stuff. But then fast forward like 3 years to 2010, people realized that you couldn't do everything, and they would specialize. So you'd have one guy, he only played heads up limit 08. And you have another guy, he only played limit triple draw. And you have another guy, he only plays six max limit. And another guy, he only plays six max PLO with an ante. And you have this level of hyper specialization where they're keeping all the data on all the players, and they're thinking about poker for 2 hours for every hour they're at the table and stuff like that. I mean, that seems like a pretty efficient world to me. So like actually the 3-way thing where I had success with last year, I think that was a level of specialization where I decided like I'm going to study the 3 ways more than anyone else, and specialize in 3 ways. And while everyone else is just playing their heads up lineup in 3 ways, which is not a smart thing to do. And that worked out. But I expect DFS will go the same way as poker in the sense of hyper specialization, where you pick what you want to do and that's all you do. Like it'll get to the level, say several years from now, where you want to be a pro DFS player, then you pick you pick your area. Let's say your area is GPP NBA,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all you do. And the off season, you're improving your models and like studying setups and everything, watching video, paying attention to Twitter every day, and like that's what you do, and that's your specialty. And you try to make 500,000 a year in NBA GPPs, being the best at that. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're a heads up cash guy, that's all you do. So I think that level of hyper specialization will come with DFS pretty soon.
Uh, you mentioned poker and specialization. I've seen you splash around in some of these super high roller events in poker, which have gotten so popular. We know that you're playing against these guys, a lot of the American guys, a lot of the German guys who have dedicated their lives to this exact specialty, high stakes, 20, 30, 40 man fields. What do you think of that kind of scene, and do you expect to continue playing those? Are they fun? I'm mostly just curious as kind of a fan of what it's like to play in those really high stakes small field events.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I think the new generation is always a little bit overrated. Like the people that are playing, just traveling around playing a lot of tournaments, they're always a little bit overrated.
Mm-hmm.
There are the true talents of poker. Like if you had someone like Patrick or Kenny Tran, like if they're putting in the same level of studying, I think they're going to be better than the new generation because there's more talent there. So there's talent, and then there's work, and I put in the work. So I think because I'm old, or I've been around for a long time, or I do a lot of other stuff, people think, well, what's he doing playing with the Germans? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But like I was taking PhD game theory classes in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was teaching game theory at Harvard in 2005 and playing poker.
Mm-hmm.
So when people talk about game theory applied to poker, I don't know, people talk about it as if like the people who have the most expertise in game theory applied to poker are like 24-year-old German kids. Like, how do they know more than me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they didn't take PhD classes in game theory. Like their understanding is, I dare say, like somewhat limited. So in terms of the modern technology, I've also done the work there because I took the time and invested the money in getting poker coaching when I realized that the future was computers solving poker, computers testing solutions against each other, solvers, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, et cetera. The first, well, I was taking lessons from Sauce, from Ben Salsky,
Mm-hmm.
over a fairly long period of time, starting around 2009 or 2010. And Sauce, he's been ahead in those areas for quite a while. And then when the ARIA tournaments popped up, and I saw their structure, the faster structures and stuff, I was thinking, all right, what do I need to improve my game in that area? And I realized that more of the short stack and mid stack play needed to be improved. So I got in touch with Max Silver, who created the Snapshove app,
Mm-hmm.
snapshove.com. And I engaged him about coaching, and I learned a lot from Max. And then at the beginning of last year, I started working with a coach, Michael Acevedo, who's based in Costa Rica, and he's an expert in Munker Solver and Pio Solver. Um, he's also written a book that's coming out in about a month that I think is the best poker book of all times. And so I studied a lot with Michael, and I actually, he actually started a company which I invested in a very small piece, and it sold to Phil Galfon's company, Run It Once, recently. So now Michael Acevedo, who I think is one of the best minds in poker, um, people are going to start hearing about him because the book is really good. It's coming out soon, and then his site was bought by Phil's site, and you're going to see his stuff online.
I'm glad you brought up the teaching game theory at Harvard, because I wanted to ask you about that. It just seems so matter of fact, and just knowing you, it's like, oh, it makes perfect sense. Brandon taught at Harvard, but that's like such a monumental thing. I couldn't even imagine anybody else I know doing that. How do you end up teaching classes at Harvard? I know you went to business school there. Was education like a huge part of your background? How do you end up teaching classes at Harvard?
So I was a doctorate student at the business school. I was a DBA, and then so I started in 2001, went all but dissertation in 2004, and then I taught for a total of 9 years. So the long background on how it came about is I went to high school in Florida, did like early admission or whatever. So I was taking courses at University of West Florida, then went to University of Florida, graduated early at 19, but was like really into academics. I was really just into studying. And then I went to the London School of Economics for a master's degree, and at that point started thinking about doing a PhD. Then I went back to University of Florida, did another master's degree, and then applied to PhD programs, got into Harvard, started Harvard in 2001. Loved the coursework, like for the first 3 years that I was doing coursework. Could see pretty early on that I didn't enjoy the research. Like I just didn't like digging in those projects. There was so much else going on that was interesting that I could see that I wouldn't want to spend a year digging into something that I didn't love doing. So the writing was kind of on the wall that like, all right, I love coursework. I love being around universities. I love teaching, but I don't enjoy research. Now you can't say that when you're in a doctorate program. It's like you can't. It's like they just view you as just a blank space if you say that. But I was teaching in the third year of coursework. I was teaching. I designed a course in behavioral finance, taught it. It was popular. Loved doing it. So when I went all but dissertation, I arranged with my advisor. I was like, look, the next couple of years, I would like to take a short break before I start the dissertation and teach in the spring. And then after the short breaks, restart the dissertation. He's like, I understand. And I had up to 5 years to restart to start the dissertation. And I could be teaching in that time, but I was a doctorate student at Harvard Business School, and I was teaching in the economics department at Harvard, undergrads.
I see.
And there's a lot of autonomy when you're a teaching fellow. You design the course, teach the course, grade the course with no outside help. And I love doing it. So basically, for years, I structured my life around the teaching, where I would teach 2 or 3 courses every spring and be all in doing that for 4.5 months. And then the rest of the year, most of those years, living in Boston and around the university, but not on the research track, not doing dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just life for like 9 years. So I taught 5 years of behavioral finance, 1 year of game theory, and 3 years of the US and the world economy, which is like international macroeconomics.
Is there a stigma at Harvard and all the people that you met there who are all incredibly brilliant? Is there a stigma around gambling there? They say, oh, Brandon's so smart. Why are you wasting your time playing poker and playing DFS or gambling on whatever? Because it seems to me like a lot of these places would stick their nose up at somebody who would, spend their brain power, their very significant brain power gambling. And maybe that's just, a bad thought on my part. That just seems to me that's the way it would go.
No, far from it. Far from it. I would say that like back in the business school days, there'd be games where the NBA players, the NBA guys would play in games and I would play in the games, and they would be like, I don't know, people enjoy doing it in the same way that Wall Street guys enjoy playing poker now. Like people talk about the games and they'd be considered a cool thing or whatever. And then there was a Harvard poker club that was a great group. I mean, some of them I'm still in touch with. One of the guys that I met there was the smartest kid I ever met at Harvard. And I set him up with Haralabob to be his main analytics guy. He worked for Haralabob for like 6 years. Mm-hmm. Like I learned a lot about poker from Harvard Poker Club, and I think, I don't know, I didn't see that stigma. And even in the economics department, they would have a class in sports analytics that was oversubscribed. I would never talk about like my poker or gambling in any way. But when I was teaching behavioral finance, like it was a super popular class. And I think some of it is because the market is like a form of gambling that people are interested in. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I don't really see that bias.
One last question about DFS before we move on to tennis and a couple other things. I'm curious, when you first heard about DFS, what your immediate thought was, and how did you go about trying to solve it? Because in some ways it's similar to poker. I think in other ways, it's pretty significantly not like poker. So did you just immediately jump into high stakes, and how'd you go about trying to learn about optimal ways to play DFS?
I first heard about it, I think 2013, 2014, maybe from Aguirre, but maybe from someone else. And I think I experimented with like ultra low dollar stuff in, say, in 2013. And then one football season, no, it was earlier than that when I think about it. I think it was 2012. It was 2012. And then maybe 2013, was that the year where the first $1 million prize pools were offered in NFL systematically?
The Millie Maker was either 2013 or 2014, I believe. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah. So maybe like NFL season in one of those years I started. And in terms of like playing for really significant amounts, I don't think it started until maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. Years before that, I'd play like depositing, I don't know, much less than now. And It was yeah. And the learning process, I'll say that the learning curve in like NBA, for instance, is just so severe.
Mm-hmm.
Like I kind of think about it now that I've been through the learning curve. I just sort of think, say on a night like tonight, where you look at the tournaments and you look at the rake, and you think, well, is it wise to play in a tournament with rake? But in the short term, I know in the long term, at some point, in the medium term, at some point, I'm just going to quit. But in the short term, I just look at it and like, yeah, if you think, okay, if I'm an average player, I'm losing a couple thousand, few thousand to the rake tonight or whatever. But in the short term, you just have to say, all right, the results are good. And the reason is I've been through that learning curve, and it's a tough learning curve. Mm-hmm. And even in bigger tournaments, like $400 tournaments or whatever, you can look through the field and you can see names that you don't recognize, and you look at their lineup and you just say, all right, that lineup is like negative 60% ROI or even negative 100% ROI. And you can see it quite a lot still today. So in the short term, pay the rake. but yeah, to your point about the ecosystem, I guess the ecosystem needs to solve the rake problem somehow to avoid dying.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to tennis, because I absolutely love tennis. I know you absolutely love tennis. I believe you're out of Indian Wells right now, one of my favorite tournaments. We played a tennis prop over the summer in Vegas, which was a lot of fun. I'm curious about the strategy, because we played this bet, you've played this bet. On the other side, a ton. You have to win a match, 6-love to win the bet. You're playing, I played you where I only had to win one game. You have played another guy that we know where you are the one who only has to win one game. I'm curious if you learned anything from our match being on the other side, and if you've changed your strategies all as you've played these bets, because I find it so fascinating, because there's so many different strategies you could employ just to try to win one game.
Sure. So we should note that the prop that I have is that I get plus 400 to win one game in a match against a player who is 300 in the world. So as you know, this has been like the world's most expensive personal trainer. I should just do mile bets every year. That's a much better personal trainer.
Yeah.
So the upside is that I get in shape and focus on my tennis game. The downside is I can't seem to win a game. But yeah, it is interesting. I do feel, as I've felt in the past, that my training is quite good this time, and I think I'm live. We're playing on Saturday. I'll let you know how it goes. But so in terms of preparation, like there's the macro, like what have I learned having not won a game? And then there's the micro of what do you do with this specific match on Saturday and how do you prepare?
Mm-hmm.
The macro, what I've learned is you have certain talents in this world. There's talent space, right? And like there's things that I'm good at. Tennis, okay. When you're playing junior tennis, and I think you played junior tennis, right?
Very little bit, but yeah.
Okay. When I was growing up, when you were in like the 12 and unders or the 14 and unders, everyone played every day. Mm-hmm. Like there was no like cell phone video game. Like if you were a tennis player, you played every day and you look forward to the tournaments on the weekends, and like you cared a lot about what happened. So it's like a crucible. 450 people in Florida are playing. Everyone's working all the time. Everyone's jockeying to see where they are in the hierarchy. I know what my place in that hierarchy was. Okay, it was somewhere like 150 out of 450.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's not very good. So everything that I've gotten, my place in the talent hierarchy is not very good. Everything that I've gotten in tennis is through hard work. I've overachieved in tennis. So you're talking about who am I playing with? I'm playing against a guy who was top 5 in the nation versus me, 150 in Florida, and then he's top 3 in NCAAs and top 300 in the world. The place on the talent hierarchy is so different, and we don't know what amounts to tennis talent. Is it just how quickly your brain communicates with your limbs, like how well your eyes see the ball, like just what aspects of reaction speed and how the brain function amounts to talent? We don't know. But he has it. I don't have it. So I think why have I lost 0-0 many times? It's basically the talent differential. It's basically like he sees the ball very clearly and doesn't make any mistakes, and I make mistakes.
Yeah.
So that's the macro picture. And by the way, within that macro picture, he is the Roger Federer of the 0-0 bet. He is unbelievable. Like there, and I don't know why we're saying like it's Stephen Bass. He was a former 300 in the world. He is the Roger Federer of the 0-0 bet. He is absolutely unbelievable at tennis. Like he's played full matches with 0 unforced errors and 0 forced errors.
Yeah.
So then you just think about like, how are you winning points?
Right.
He's 33, fast as lightning, anticipates where you're hitting the ball, and makes 0 unforced errors and 0 forced errors in a whole match.
Yeah.
It becomes difficult to win points, much less games. So then it's the micro of, okay, preparing for the match this Saturday. There are patterns that I continually think might work that don't work. So one pattern is hitting a lot of high quality hard shots, not missing, moving him side to side, just playing high quality points. It feels good, but the results are that I don't win the point because I'm not hitting a winner. He's not missing. So he just wins all those points and I get tired. So it's thinking about bad patterns that develop and then, okay, taking chances and trying to avoid those bad patterns. So, of course, I've tried all the variations like come into the net, serve and volley, do slice and dice, whatever. I've tried every variation and they don't work. But what really doesn't work is like playing his game, just trying not to miss. Right? That like really doesn't work.
Right.
So yeah, I have a game plan. It's an aggressive game plan naturally. And I feel like I'm playing pretty well right now. So we'll see. I feel good. I feel good about I actually feel, I mean, it might sound crazy, but I actually feel that I'm the betting favorite at the plus 400.
I love that this has become like your life's mission. I mean, this is like my favorite bet to track, especially since I've played both of you. You guys can find on Periscope, I played Bass. He had a frying pan. I had my racket. I had 4 match points. He ended up somehow escaping and beating me in the 3rd set. And then I also played Brandon, which you can also find on Periscope, where I only had to win 1 game or 2 games, I believe it was. And I was fortunate to come out on top there, but Brandon's clearly way, way, way better than me. I don't know. I don't know why I love these tennis bets so much. It's just, it's fun. I hope we can do it again. It's so much more interesting to me than the running bet.
I want to do a running bet again. I want to do the 3 mile bet. That would be good for fitness. We can set up the 3 mile bet.
You exposed your hand by running like a 5:20 something at age 40 or whatever you are.
But we're gonna do a 3 mile bet in November. That would be great for fitness.
Yeah, it's so good. All right. I want to ask you a question about your book, Personal Organization for Degenerates. I talk a lot on this podcast about how I'll always swap money for time. And I know that was a big tenet of your book as well. Do you ever find that, I don't know, you feel guilty that you're not doing things for yourself or you're wasting money, or is it always just a clear-cut decision to swap money for time in almost all scenarios where it's possible?
Well, I think that's simplifying the message from the book. The book, I've been extremely happy with the reception because people that I respect deeply have given me compliments on it out of the blue, which is always a good sign. Like
Hmm.
where you don't even know they've read it and they say something really, really good about it. They go out of their way to say something really good about it.
Hmm.
Um, and I wrote it just as almost like a favor. Like these are the things that I wish that I had known when I was 27 or whatever. So I feel like the book is underread in a lot of people that should learn from it. And it's a short book. They should read it. Um, and the lessons are in health, money management, time management, avoiding like pitfalls. And basically, the title was meant to be funny, but also meant to like segment the market a little bit. Um, a lot of people, now degenerate has a different connotation or whatever, but it's meant to be like the people that you and I spend a lot of time with. We know they're not degenerates. Like
Hmm.
they try their hardest. They work at a discipline. But basically, if you're playing a lot of daily fantasy sports, if you're like listening to podcasts like this, if you're kind of doing the stuff that we do, you could you could classify yourself in that way. And more to the point, as it relates to this book, you have certain weaknesses that need to be managed, or certain pitfalls that need to be watched out for, and that's sort of what the book is about. As it relates to time, um, yeah, like you should specialize and trade money for time when you can. My my challenge is there's a lot of interesting things going on in the world, and it actually is smart to be scanning the world for different things that you might invest your time and energy in. Um, but then when it comes to execution, you should specialize. And when it comes to anything involving money, it's usually smart to specialize. Um, and when it comes to speculation and gambling in particular, you you should specialize because you have this phenomena where the bad things you do are much more important than the good things you do. So let's say you're a professional sports bettor. You make a bet on something, you don't realize the player is injured, they withdraw, your ROI is negative 100%. You have to have a lot of good plus 2% plays to make that up. Or
Hmm.
an example all of us know from DFS, uh, a guy is scratched at 6:58 p.m. You could have known that. You could have been following Twitter closely enough to swap him out of your lineup. You didn't. As a result, your ROI on that lineup is negative 100%. It's gonna take you a lot of good lineups that are earning 2% over the rake to make up for that negative 100% ROI that you had on that avoidable mistake.
Hmm.
So speculation just has this property where the bad things you do are more consequential than the good things you do. So you have to be very careful, and you have to. One way to be careful is to be specialized. I uh, I appear to be not specialized, but really all the things that I do are related, and I try to focus on one thing at a time. So I strive to be somewhat specialized, even if it appears that I'm not in some ways. And there's a book that I like, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Short book. It talks about the need to constantly have focus and force yourself to be focused on specific areas. And I've read the book 3 times. I also, somewhere in my room right now, I have a list. I made a list for myself, like essentialism mistakes, where like I could have focused on one thing and done it well, and instead on that day I focused on 3 things and did them all in a mediocre fashion or poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those essentials. There's a reason I've read the book 3 times, because I do make the mistakes in essentialism, but I'm striving to avoid those mistakes and to specialize. And when I say specialize, it's just like do one thing well. You can still do multiple things. It's just like do one thing well, then move on to the next thing, do that well, like that, and don't have that clutter of activity where you're trying to do 5 things at once. Now, all of us are going to find times where we're in that state of trying to do a bunch of things at once, but it's important to at least strive to specialize. It's like when you're doing Sunday mornings, you are managing a social media audience that's relying on you. You're being a dad, and you're putting in DFS lineups. Mm-hmm. So you're doing a minimum of 3 things. And you also might have like some NBA player that you met who wants your opinion on his NFL lineups, and he's texting you or whatever. Mm-hmm. You got random things that are pulling for your attention, but you got to do at least 3 things, which is a pretty hard thing. And sometimes you're gonna take on 6 things and do a mediocre job on all of them, and that's just gonna happen. That's life. But you need to at least strive towards essentialism, simplicity, and some level of specialization.
Yeah.
Very, very, very important for anyone in the speculation space. Yeah. Anyone who's like doing DFS and so forth.
Yeah.
And by the way, related to that is a rake consciousness. Like you have to think, am I specialized enough to beat the rake? And am I tracking things well enough to know how I'm doing relative to the rake?
I think there's so many people in business and in like kind of the sports media space that are trying to do everything, and that's really hard, I think. And as a consumer of sports media also, I'm always interested in people that are doing niche inside of a niche, so I try to concentrate on DFS, and not just DFS, but DFS football, and not just DFS football, but DFS football cash, and like the further you can go into the niche, I feel like the better people can be at it. And just as you said, I think it's important.
I believe that, but I mean, take poker, for example. This is a kind of a strange example, but if you take like World Poker Tour events in 2003, there were tournaments where I considered playing, where maybe I had whatever, like $50,000, and I could have taken partners or whatever and played in one $10,000 tournament. And everyone was bad back then, pretty much. Probably a smart idea not to play in them, but in 2003, there were tournaments you could have played in where your entry fee was $10,000, but your like media value, in a sense of having played in it, was like another $30,000.
Yeah.
Just the way that it evolved over time, let's just say. So DFS, this whole sports gambling space, we might be in the infancy of something that's truly huge, like way bigger than poker, just because fully legal from the get-go, and like just our societal orientation towards speculation, whether it's stock market or whatever. Like sports could just get bigger and bigger, and we could be at the infancy of that. And so decisions that are bad, like playing in a fantasy qualifier that has 17% rake or whatever, like you don't know what that decision is going to be like 5 years from now, because maybe having won a DK live final is worth a lot of money for your brand, for the Adam Levitan brand of being a sports commentator. We don't know how the world is going to develop. But what seems somewhat obvious to me is that whatever is happening in daily fantasy sports, what's happening in the legal sports gambling landscape is such that it's just guaranteed to be massive in 3 to 5 years. And the media space, there are certain individual deals where you're like, oh, they seem to have overpaid for that deal. But when you look at the landscape, it still seems underdeveloped relative to what's going to be there in 5 years. So I think, I don't know, I think it's a pretty exciting space.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt it's going to be huge. I mean, you can just tell just by looking at numbers around the world, and even early numbers in New Jersey, which is right across the bridge from where I'm from. I mean, it's just crazy how excited people are. All right, we're running low on time here, though, Brandon. Let's get to the listener questions. The people have questions. They need answers. First one comes from Ryan Hodge. He says, does Brandon have a special diet? The dude is a machine. I was curious about that. Do you have a normal special diet? Did you have a special diet leading up to our 1 mile race last year?
I did not have a special diet for the race. I actually gained weight in the 6 weeks leading up to the race, because my training was I would go to the track, run a mile, go home. And I'd feel like I worked really hard, so eat a lot. And I actually gained weight. And I had a minor injury where I took like 12 days off. So I don't know. I think I ran like 25 1 miles or something. And usually I would just run a mile and go home, or I'd run 2 miles and go home. Not very good training, but I gained weight during that time because I would feel hungry and eat. I've read a lot about nutrition. I really enjoy reading in that area, and I've read a lot about health. The keto low carb fascination is just all the rage in poker for sure. And I didn't think it could get more popular, but it just seems to get more popular by the day. I'm not a fan of that particular diet. I'm more classical in my taste. Like I like maybe the Mediterranean diet. I think low carb is taxing on your body. And in short stints, if you're trying to lose body fat over a month or two, I think it's fine. But to try to make that your steady state seems like a bad idea, because we know that complex carbs are your cleanest burning fuel. And they're relatively soft on the body. So I prefer to have a diet that's fairly carb heavy. So yeah, I mean, I eat a lot. I would be more fit if I didn't eat out so much and enjoy wine and stuff like that. But yeah, like no special diet.
Okay.
I do play tons of tennis, and then I will go to the gym sometimes. I don't lift weights very often. I'll run on the treadmill. And then, as you know, I like to push it a little bit when I'm running on the treadmill, get some tool going. whatever.
Brandon's convinced that this song is the key to him running well. Like no matter how many
Well,
songs I
yeah,
listen
but you
to,
don't understand that there was a lot of testing that went into that. Like
but no matter what song I listen to, I was never going to beat you.
I tested hip hop. I tested different EDM. Like, is it 150 beats per minute? Is it like 135? Whatever. And then I went back to old school. Like, all right, let's do some Deftones, Rage Against the Machine, Tool. And I realized that Tool was where it's at. And then I was like, all right, well, how do you make it last exactly like 5.5, 6 minutes? And when I found Parable, I was like, all right, this is the perfect song. Like, just start off Parabola, 1, 2, where it just starts chant like for 3 minutes and then just drops.
Right.
That I had found the perfect song for the mile.
No, it makes sense, but you still have to, your lungs have to be capable and your legs have to be capable. I mean, I never really broke 6 minutes while training, so I don't think that I was ever going to get to 5:30, get close to you.
Well, I did realize in the course of doing that bet that I should have actually been a runner. Like, if I were looking for my best sport,
yeah,
that's actually what I should have done.
Yeah.
Because my eye-hand coordination, whatever, I'm an all right tennis player, but I should have been a runner.
Yeah. You have the body, the long, lean body. Yeah.
So anyway.
All right. Question 2 comes from Harbs. He says, given that Brandon was a college professor, does he think the value of education is overblown now, given the resources the internet provides and the substantial increase in cost to attend formal institutions? I thought that was a good question.
Well, no, I think you should still try to focus on college and graduate education. The problem with the promise of online education is that, yeah, you can go to Coursera and get the best possible education. We could all do that at any moment of any day. None of us do it. Why? Because there are infinite distractions online. So we're clicking and going here or there, opening 100 browser windows, whatever. So the real value of education is you sit in the classroom for an hour and a half, you go to the library and study for a 5-hour session. Like, you do this sort of attention span training, basically, that none of us in today's society do. So I do think that for me personally, there were a lot of like long days in the library where I was just with a notebook and books. And I benefited from that over the long term by having learned the material that you forget most of it, but some of it stays with you, and B, just having that very long attention span at age 20, like an extreme attention span and an extreme ability to take on detail. That dissipates a little bit year by year, just modern society. But there's some remnants of it still there.
Yeah.
So I think the battle now for every person is, how do you retain the ability to focus in this world where we're bombarded with stimuli?
I think the thing that people point to is to these days to get the education that you had, undergrad, 2 master's degrees, et cetera, PhD candidate. I mean, it could cost you 500,000, $1 million. Are you going to find
just to track on that? I went to University of Florida on a scholarship where it was free.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to London School of Economics, which I did pay for. Then when you're a Harvard doctoral student, they pay you.
Okay.
So
okay, then you're a bad example.
That experience wasn't my experience.
Right.
But
for some people, it could cost 500,000 to go to undergrad and then go to graduate school.
Yeah, I've never understood the lack of price sensitivity when it comes to undergrad schools. My dad, he was when he was talking about schools, he was like, if you get in to Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, I'll pay for those. I will not pay for Emory, Vanderbilt, like any of these schools, Tulane, like any of these schools. Those are great schools. He was just like, I'm not paying for any school that isn't A plus, because you have the option to go to University of Florida, and it was basically free at the time. They had some tuition program or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So as it happened, like I just went to University of West Florida and then went to University of Florida, and didn't try to go to the top schools for undergrad. But I think his philosophy was right in the sense that, well, actually, I'm not sure if, well, I know for Emilian Bear that won't be my philosophy. Mm-hmm. But I think that philosophy is reasonable, and I don't understand the lack of price sensitivity that people have for school. A lot of these private schools just shouldn't exist. Like,
right.
Do public schools at scale that are reasonably priced. And like I went to University of West Florida. Like University of West Florida is great. Arguably, I got a better education there than at University of Florida. Mm-hmm. Most people who go to University of West Florida are commuting. It's not an expensive model for school. Yeah, like try to do education, but be price sensitive about it, and make judgments about the rewards that you'll get versus the cost. Sometimes the cost is high, but the rewards are high enough to justify.
Yeah. Second to last question we have here comes from Ryan Brody. He says, actually third to last question. We're going to do three more because I like all three of these. Ryan Brody says he loved personal organization for degenerates. Does he have any plans for more books in the future? The people want more, Brandon. They want more books.
Well, we have the book that the team at Advanced Sports Analytics did for fantasy football, which you can find on Amazon, Advanced Daily Fantasy Football. And then I have notes towards a very short book called Advanced Poker in 2 Hours that I intend to be like 12,000 words. Really summarizing recent developments in computer methods applied to poker and like some generalizable findings there. Fairly advanced stuff, but 2 hours is a serious target, so 12,000 words. Have no idea when I will turn the 6,000 to 8,000 words that currently exist to 12,000 words and put it out, but I would like to do that at some point.
Yeah, that would be cool. You need a catchy name, like, beating the Germans or something like that. I don't know. Something cool.
You don't think Advanced Poker in 2 hours is a good one?
Yeah, in 2 hours might get some people. Yeah, that might get some people. But I do think that people are fascinated. Like you mentioned, like people don't think that this guy, who isn't young in a hoodie, is winning, 100Ks. Like people don't think that makes sense. So I think if you wrote a book about how that's happening, I think that would do really well.
Yeah.
All right. Related question from Poker Poise. He says, what does Brandon think he's better at, DFS or poker?
Poker, I would say, because DFS, my approach is just brute force, like just working hard. And poker, I think there's some level of talent there. So I don't know. I feel like I'm better at poker.
All right. Last question we're going to do before we wrap up comes from Dakota Jones. Very important question. He says, who has the nicer wine collection, Brandon or Empire Maker 2? Of course, if you guys don't know Empire, he's famous for tweeting stuff like he drank a $90 bottle of wine. It was so bad he had to get his stomach pumped, et cetera, et cetera. Who has the nicer wine collection, you or EM2?
I mean, anyone who knows Team Vale, who knows our crew, knows that it's Empire. It's not even close. I mean, Empire, I might have to have a sit down with him at some point. Like, he's got a problem. He's
With
got a
expensive
problem.
wine, you mean? He has a problem with expensive wine.
Well, there isn't a chapter on this in Personal Organization for Degenerates, but one of the reasons to be modest in your spending all the time is that it's a more sustainable long-term path. Like if you're the guy who, when they're running hot in Vegas, is tipping the valet with like 20s and hundreds and like getting the bottle service and stuff like that, fine, it's great to be that guy. But then what are you going to do when things go poorly? Like, you're going to show the valet, like, here's like $2, like how do you reverse track is what I'm like. You always have to have it at a level where if you reverse track, it's like, all right, cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to show up to the valet one day and give him 100, then the next day give him $2? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, that's my same argument with expensive liquor. Like, you're never going to catch me buying like $1,000 bottle of wine, because if like every time you sit down to dinner you have the $300 bottle of wine, like, what are you going to think? What's everyone going to think when you order like the $30 bottle of wine? It's like a totally unsustainable path. So anyway, gotta have that sit down with Empire at some point. But he's crazy with that. And then in addition, when it comes to the wine collection, never been one to like keep a cellar. I'll have maybe like 10 bottles and they rotate in and out, whatever. Can't imagine that Empire has a collection either. I think he's on the same like 10 bottle program, but they are better bottles, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. Well, we concede. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on, Brandon. Tell the people where they can find you. They want to get in touch with you. They want to read the book. They want to go to your DFS site. Give the people how they can find all that stuff.
Sure. Twitter is at badam78. My fantasy site is www.advancedsportsanalytics.com. We also have a Twitter that's at ADV Sports ANALY. That's the only one we could find. And then brandonadams.co is like a personal website.
All right. Really appreciate you coming on. Best of luck. I really hope you win the tennis bet. Today's Friday. This won't come out until next week, so we will have a result for Brandon in the tennis bet. I really hope he gets there so he completes his life mission and he doesn't have to keep doing this bet over and over again.
Hey, give me honest opinion. Should this be the last one? It can't be the last one. First of all, yeah, I will get back on the horse if I fail on Saturday, but I feel good. I had a secret weapon this week. I had some really good coaching.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's like I couldn't hit a winner past him even with the frying pan just because his movement was so ridiculous. So, like you said, I don't know how I win points if I can't hit winners and he's not making mistakes, So
you agree? He is like the Roger Federer of these bets. Like, his mental lockdown is so strong.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely out-mentaled me when we were deep in the second set and obviously in the third set. Yeah, I don't know. If I was doing this 0-0 bet against him, I asked him for 10-1. I might only take like 12-1 or something like that. So, I don't know. We'll see. But I hope you win, man. Get one for the good guys over here. It's enough. Bro. All right.
Thanks.
For Brandon, for producer Luke, for Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.